What's up, my Reaper seekers? Today, we're going to be looking at Caesar's campaigns in Hispania that was part of Caesar's life before he even became a dictator. This is 61 BC now, or that was the time when he became dictator. I'm not very sure, guys, but this is a documentary about it. So, guys, let's go. And what, before I, wait a minute, see these soldiers? They're called legions, or vigils. They were standard Roman infantry with, like, plated armor, which I'm very impressed on how the Romans... Yeah, that's all.
Julius Caesar is primarily remembered for three things today: his rapid conquest of Gaul, the decisive civil war he fought against his Roman rivals, and his spectacular assassination on the Ides of March when he was at the peak of his power. However, these great deeds and tragic events often overshadow his earlier accomplishments. In this video, we will be discussing the history of one such event in his earlier life: Caesar's first campaigns in Hispania.
Oh, serious? Rome and Hispania, I think that's somewhere in
For
Spain.
context, we should first discuss what the Iberian Peninsula was like.
I was right, Spain.
It was populated mostly by Iberian and mixed Celt-Iberian tribes, led by local chieftains and noblemen, all of whom were fiercely independent and warlike. These
Wow.
tribes were in turn divided into many different clans, and the loyalty of the tribesmen was often given first to these smaller groups. However, on the eastern coastline, there were also several more advanced city-states that rivaled the prosperity of their Punic and Greek neighbors, and that showed signs of considerable material development compared to their tribal peers.
Serious?
The Roman Republic had first become directly involved in the Iberian Peninsula in 218 BC at the start of the Second Punic War. For several years, Roman armies had worked to disrupt the influence of their Carthaginian enemies in the area, while also shoring up their own dominance of the local tribes. By 204
That's a
BC,
lot of
the Romans
troops
had
I
been able to
see.
completely eject the Carthaginians from
Oh
Hispania,
yeah,
and cut them
Rome.
off from its
Total
great
War,
resources,
Rome
marking
2,
a turning point
Total
in
War,
what
Rome
would
2,
end in Rome's
guys.
total victory just a few years later. The Romans then began to consolidate their own rule in Hispania, creating a pair of new provinces there. Although the area had considerable resources, especially in the old Punic silver mines, Hispania would also prove to be a source of frequent and brutal conflicts. Many campaigns were fought against the native tribes over the course of the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, but generally the Romans did not display much interest in fully conquering Hispania at this time, and parts of the peninsula even remained unexplored by them. By 61 BC, the Roman provinces in the Iberian Peninsula had been in a state of relative peace for around a decade, following the end of a bloody Roman civil war fought in the region. That, however, was soon to change with the arrival of a new governor.
Caesar.
Gaius Julius Caesar was born around 100 BC to the old aristocratic family of the Iulii Caesares.
Yeah, from the previous video.
The family had never managed to distinguish themselves in Roman politics, and certainly did not appear to measure up to their heady claim of being descended from the goddess Venus. But as history well records, Caesar was to become not just the most famed member of this family, but also the most well-remembered Roman of them all.
Wow,
First
serious?
gained recognition during the dictatorship of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, after which he increased in prominence over the years, holding a series of civil offices and gaining some military experience. While Caesar did become embroiled in his fair share of controversy, most recently during a turbulent period as praetor in 62 BC at Rome, he was generally able to advance his career at a steady pace. In 61 BC, Caesar secured his first major military and civil office as propraetor and governor of the province of Hispania Ulterior. At first, however, it appeared that
there's
he might
two
not even be able
provinces?
to leave Rome at all to assume his post. Caesar was heavily in debt at the time due to the enormous costs associated with a political career, and his creditors were demanding debt payments. This may have been simply due to impatience, but Caesar's recent chaotic term as praetor may also have caused him to question his chances of success in the long term. Fortunately for Caesar, he found a benefactor in Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's richest man, who agreed to loan Caesar a vast sum of 830 talents, although even this was just a fraction of his debts. Nevertheless, the amount was enough to provide his creditors surety for the time being, and Caesar hurriedly departed for Hispania before the Senate had even formally announced the provinces and their governors. While this was a mere formality, as Caesar's governorship had already been secured beforehand, it was a notable breach of convention and would not be the last time that Caesar ran into such problems. While he may have been concerned about facing more opposition from his enemies in Rome, he may also have had more
Mm-hmm.
practical concerns about his province.
Chainmail
Suetonius, for
armor?
instance, claims that Caesar's
I thought
hasty
they had
departure from
plates.
Rome may have been due to the repeated pleas for help from Rome's allies in Hispania, as they were under heavy attack from their enemies. Caesar did not depart for Hispania on his own. Roman governors did not operate alone in their provinces, but were always assisted by a small staff of other officials and officers. Caesar's entourage included his quaestor Vetus, who was in charge of finances in the province and its garrison. Caesar had served as such an official himself once, and for Vetus's father nonetheless. Next was Lucius Cornelius Balbus, who held the title of Praefectus Fabrum, or camp prefect. Balbus was a native Iberian himself, hailing from a wealthy and well-connected family that had recently been given Roman citizenship through the patronage of Pompey the Great. He appears to have accompanied Caesar primarily to serve as one of his senior military officers.
Serious?
Caesar was also accompanied by a client of his from Numidia, whom he had unsuccessfully defended in court months ago, and who had been hiding in his household ever since. With this small band of followers, Caesar set out for his first governorship.
Caesar goes to war.
The province of Hispania Ulterior was not in the most stable condition when Caesar arrived. Banditry was rife in the region, and the numbers of these brigands had recently been swelled even further by many heavily indebted men fleeing their creditors. Much of the area was still scarred by the recent civil war with the general Sertorius, and it appears that many cities had a somewhat uneasy relationship with each other. Moreover, there was tension along the borders of the province, where hostile tribes still lingered and were already attacking Rome's allies. Caesar's first task was to eliminate this resistance. Being a provincial governor and commander of an
What were
army
those
gave
swords?
Caesar the opportunity to win fresh military glory, something he doubtless aspired to do. Back at Rome, his enemies quickly accused him of provoking an unnecessary conflict in the area, and even attacking communities allied to Rome. Such accusations were commonplace in the politics of the late Republic, whether they were credible or not, and it is impossible to say how guilty Caesar was of the things he was blamed for. The regions he campaigned in were not generally very wealthy, so it seems unlikely that Caesar was embarking on a campaign purely to enrich himself. According to Cassius Dio, Caesar was rather driven by a lust for glory and a desire to emulate the other successful Roman generals who had fought in the region, such as Pompey the Great. Defeating hostile tribes would also have the practical effect of removing a threat to Roman interests and to other communities allied to the Republic. According to Plutarch, Caesar initially had a force of 20 cohorts at his disposal, or the
Wow.
equivalent of 2 legions at the time. Caesar decided to enlarge this army for the coming campaign, and within just a few days of his arrival had added another 10 cohorts to his field army. Unfortunately, we do not know the precise identity of these troops, but the bulk of his army was surely the traditional Roman legionaries, heavy infantrymen fighting principally as close order troops. This force was likely augmented by local auxiliaries, who were known to provide the Romans with good quality light and heavy infantry organized into their own independent cohorts under Roman officers. Caesar's principal target was the Lusitani, a warlike people who had a long history of bitter resistance to Rome, though he would also campaign against the Celtiberians. The Roman army advanced deep into the region between the Tagus and Duero, and first encountered resistance at a fortified hilltop town. He ordered the inhabitants to abandon their homes in exchange for being resettled on the open plains, the intent being to remove their formidable hill fort as a base for launching raids. As Caesar expected, they refused, and the Romans quickly stormed the town. Caesar then captured several other nearby communities, where some of the inhabitants had already fled before the Roman advance. After this initial foray, the Romans soon encountered the main Lusitanian army, which attempted to draw the Romans into a trap.
That leather caps? Seriously?
However, Caesar saw past this ploy and avoided the apparently easy plunder, instead closing directly with the enemy army and defeating it. In addition to being a major victory for Roman rule in Hispania, this action was also notable for being Caesar's first pitched battle in command of an army. Soon
Wow.
after, Caesar received intelligence about a second Lusitanian army gathering to his rear, intending to ambush the Romans on their return journey to the province. Caesar decided to turn his opponents' trap against them, at first marching along a different road than expected, and then suddenly wheeling his army around and attacking the unsuspecting Lusitanian warriors, routing them thoroughly. The Lusitanians then withdrew further inland towards the Atlantic coast and took refuge on a small island, pursued hard by Caesar. The Romans, however, now faced a predicament, where they only had a small number of boats at hand and no large transports to ferry their troops over to the enemy shore. Undeterred, Caesar ordered his men to build several large rafts, and with these was able to send a part of his army across. Unfortunately,
That's amazing.
the commander of the assault force ordered his troops to disembark too soon, leading to the attack being thrown into disorder as they struggled through the water. The legionaries fought valiantly, but were killed almost to a man. Only a single soldier named Publius Scaevius managed to escape after being wounded several times, discarding his heavy shield to swim back to the main force. After this defeat, Caesar sent a request for ships to the city of Gades, which was fortunately able to provide enough transports to ferry his whole army across to the island. In the end,
Wow.
however, no fighting was needed to actually take it. The Lusitanians had virtually run out of supplies and were starving, and surrendered with no further resistance after the Romans landed. The defeat of the Lusitanians on this unknown island marked the effective end of the war, as no other large enemy armies were left to oppose the Romans.
Wow.
Newly acquired
So wait a minute.
Caesar
They
then
were out of
sailed along the
supplies.
coast, mopping up any remaining resistance. Most of the local tribes had never seen such
Yeah, because of
large
the war.
ships like those used by the Romans, which gave Caesar an added psychological advantage, and would soon come to good use when he arrived in the territory of the Celtiberians. One of the major cities there, upon witnessing the large Roman fleet bearing down upon them, was so overawed that they surrendered without any resistance. This marked yet another notable success for Caesar, as many of these regions and settlements had long remained independent of Roman rule, and now for the first time we're seeing the legions in action. Following this last success, Caesar at last returned to his province and concluded the campaign. Caesar had gained the military glory he had always wanted from his governorship, subjugating new territories and tribes, and was even declared imperator by his men in recognition of his victories.
The aftermath. Yeah, what is the aftermath?
Despite his focus on military matters in Hispania Ulterior, Caesar also accomplished much in administrative issues, a balance that would come to characterize his later endeavors. He first solved the province's extensive problem with debt, which had driven so many men to outlawry, issuing a decree whereby creditors would claim up to 2/3 of the income of their debtors until the amount owed had been paid, but that the remaining third would have to remain with the debtors to allow them to support themselves and their families. This immediately cut down on the number of men running off to join the bands of bandits who had run rampant across the province. Caesar also improved relations between the communities in his province, and appears to have made moves to shut down the old practice of human sacrifice among the locals.
Mm-hmm.
Caesar served for a year as propraetor in his province, after which he returned to Rome. His governorship had been a great success, both for himself and his province, and his reputation gained considerable boost as a result. In his time in Hispania, we can see many signs of the Caesar most familiar to us from the Gallic and Civil Wars. Swift but calculating as a general.
Hey, I know these are
undaunted by
plums.
natural obstacles,
They're used for,
equipped with an
that's what
uncanny
the
ability to
Romans
command his
used
men.
for
This was
throwing.
complemented by his skills in administration and managing relationships with the people around him. He had hoped to celebrate a triumph for his successes against the Lusitanians and Celtiberians. However, this move was blocked by his political opponents in Rome, led by a staunch anti-Caesarian senator named Cato.
Okay, that
This, however,
statue is
did not
creepy.
especially
Why does
disturb
it not
Caesar, who
have...
was already content with his successful term as governor, and was hopeful of accomplishing even greater deeds in the future. And as history remembers well, such deeds did indeed await Caesar not long after he returned to Rome. But that is a story for another time. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content on ancient Rome, and check out my other social media in the links below. See you in the next one.
Alright guys, that was a beautiful one right here, and I really liked it. I was interested actually. And also, if you like this video too, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.